Hi, I'm Marilyn Woodruff with At Knits and Designs, and I'm here today to introduce you to the Ceangal cowl. This cowl was so fun for me. I took a spontaneous trip to Ireland back in August, and as part of that trip, I visited Hedgehog Fibers and absolutely fell in love with the Oh So Fine Cashmere blend. It is so cozy and so warm, and it was an absolute delight to knit with. And this cowl is called the Ceangal cowl because Ceangal is the Irish word for lynx. And the construction is so fun. It's knitted in 2 links, and you actually knit it flat and then knit the exact same thing again, flat in inverse colors, and then link them together and graft them. And it makes for a very flexible cowl. You can wear it showing the lace side up. You can wear it showing the diagonal up. You can wear it in either color, and it's the perfect size to just slide around your neck and then zip right under your coat. And I've absolutely delighted in wearing this winter, and it is the most cozy thing I own. So I really hope you enjoy the Ceangal cowl, and I'm very excited to show you the stitches in the pattern. Happy knitting! You'll start with a provisional cast on. Your provisional cast on is just simply a long tail cast on made with waste yarn. So choose a waste yarn that is somewhat smooth so that it's easy to pull out at the end, and make sure that it is a very different color than either of the 2 yarns that you've chosen. So just a word to the wise, I chose a yarn that was orange when I did my sample, and that was so close to the pink that I really did have a hard time finding it. So make sure that it is very different from the 2 colors that you're using to cast on. At the end of the video, when we're ready to talk about grafting, I'll talk about how to remove this cast on. When you're casting on with your yarn, note in the pattern, we hold the yarn double always. So every single time you pick up either color, you'll pick up 2 strands. The easiest way to do that is once you wind your cake or wind your ball, put it on a kitchen scale and then measure as you wind a ball off of half of it. So that way you basically have 2 balls that are each a half skein, and it will make your life a whole lot easier. So you'll hold the yarn double, and then just casting on, after you get your provisional cast on completed, leave yourself quite a long tail. I would say at least 6 inches, just because weaving in, you're using fairly large needles for this yarn. And so when it comes time to weave in those ends, it's going to take more yarn than you probably expect. So every time you change colors, leave yourself plenty of yarn at the end to make sure that you can really tuck those tails in and hide them. So when you cast on your provisional cast on, it's going to look like this. And you will go ahead and knit a couple of rows, and then you will reach a wrap and turn. So I'm just going to make a very tiny baby doll, Barbie-sized version of this cowl to show you all of the different steps of what you need to do. So I will meet you back when it's time to do the first wrap and turn. All right, before we get started with the wrap and turn, I think it might be helpful to understand how this is constructed because it is a little bit different. So you've set up your cast on row and you've knitted 2 rows, or you've knitted a row, and now you've knitted most of the second row and you're ready to wrap and turn. And what's going to happen is, if this is your edge stitch, you're going to wrap this stitch, and then every time you're going to wrap 1 subsequent stitch in. So the actual construction is going to look like this, where you're getting shorter and shorter and shorter each time. And so you're going to have a series of wraps going up here. And then you're going to pick up color 2. You'll be here, and you're going to knit this direction, and you're going to pick up each of those wraps. And then you'll create a series of doubly large yarn overs here, and then you're going to go back to your color 1 and you're going to pick up all of this again, and then you're going to do the opposite. So you're going to get longer and longer and longer each time, And then you're going to kind of finish off with a series of different ridges and stitches. And this will actually end up resulting in a rectangle. And then once you finish this, you'll put these last stitches up here on hold. And then you will go back and you'll recreate this exact same piece of fabric in opposite colors. So whatever you would use as your first main color here, you'll use the other color. So you'll use your contrast color as the main color in the second piece. So you'll have two identical pieces, except they'll be in opposite colors. So with that in mind, I think that will help understand some of the directions and be able to trust the pattern. So let's look at the wrap and turn. So the way the wrap and turn works is just a standard wrap and turn. You're going to bring your yarn forward, and then you're going to slip the stitch to your left needle, take the yarn to the back and slip the stitch back. That's the wrap. And now we're going to turn. And then you just take the yarn to the back and just continue knitting as normal. And what that does is creates this little sleeve around the yarn. You can see right here, there's an extra little cuff in my stitch. And so whenever we come back around to this stitch, when we go to make that diagonal, we'll pick those up to keep it nice and clean. So I'll show you once again exactly how to do this. So starting from the beginning, we've knitted across and now we're ready to wrap and turn. So we are going to bring our yarn forward between the needles. We're going to slip the stitch purlwise to the other needle, bring the yarn to the back, slip that same stitch back, and then bring the yarn forward and turn, and you're ready to knit. So we will just continue knitting as usual. I got my yarn all discombobulated here. There we go. So your yarn is in the back, you're ready to knit. So we will continue knitting as usual. You'll knit across, and then you'll come back, and then you'll look for where's your stitch with this extra little collar around it. So we won't touch that stitch again. So the next time we come back, we're going to wrap this stitch, this third from the end stitch. So you're always going to look for where's your extra collar, and you're going to wrap the stitch just to the other side of it. And that's how you will work this entire first section for all of this. And you'll end up with a right triangle piece of fabric. And once you complete that, then you'll change colors and we'll come down this diagonal, picking up those colors. And I will meet you there. All right. So I have my little Barbie size triangle here, and I have picked up all the stitches. You can see there's no collar on either of the edge stitches, but every other stitch has the second collar around it after I have done the wrap and turn. So we're going to knit across with joining yarn number 2, and each one of these stitches we are going to pick up that wrap. And actually we're going to purl across these because otherwise it makes a big hole. So when we pick this up, you're going to, the easiest way is to slip it onto the other needle, find that little collar, and then just slip your needle under that collar and onto this. So it'll look like you've got 4 loops on, but that's all one stitch. And then we will purl that stitch. So we will slide the stitch over. We'll find the little collar. So you're going to have 2 different collars down here. You're going to have 2 loops that are the actual garter bump, and you're going to have 2 loops that are the collar. So you only want to pick up those 2 loops that are the collar, slide that back over, and purl your stitch. So we'll do that all the way across, and that will set up your second color. Now, when we get to the yarn overs, they are doubly large yarn overs. So what you will do, let's pretend like I have done everything I needed to do up to those yarn overs, and now I'm ready to do my yarn overs. Oops, I just lost all my stitches. Whenever I'm ready to do those yarn overs, I'm going to knit into that stitch, and it's just a normal, you're going to knit 2 together, and then you're going to do a normal yarn over, and you're just going to extra 1 loop. So it's going to look like you've got 2 loops on there, but you will drop them on the next row. So you're going to knit 2 together, and then you're going to 1, 2. That's your yarn over. And what that will do will make a very large eyelet hole, as opposed to one that's just the size of the needles. It'll make a really big one. And that will set up that diagonal. And then we'll go back and do the rest of the wraps and turns to make the rectangle. And then just put once that rectangle is completed, just put that either on some waste yarn, or if you're using interchangeable needles, just put it on an extra cable. Make sure that you put some cable stoppers on the end if you do that. I had one. This yarn is very slick, so the cable will slide out. And then from there, just go ahead and make that second fabric piece, and then we'll graft them in garter stitch, which is really easy. The Kitchener stitch is much harder when you're doing it in stockinette than it is when you're doing it in garter. And so I will meet you back here when you're ready to graft them together. Happy knitting! Okay, we're back, and congratulations on finishing your fabric. You're almost done. So I have the world's tiniest cowl here, and I'm going to graft this cowl. You should have your needles on one side, or your cord. You just reattach your needles. And then on the other side, we're going to pick up this provisional cast on and put it back on a smaller set of needles. It can be pretty much any size of needles you want. I would recommend maybe a size 8 if you stuck with the US 10 needles for your main body. You just don't want to stretch these stitches too much. For the sake of today's demonstration, I'm just going to use a DPN that I have sitting here. I wouldn't recommend using a needle this small, but I want you to really clearly be able to see what I'm doing. Also, you should have a very long tail that you left. If you don't, just make sure you leave a really long tail when you reconnect yarn, and you'll be grafting with that yarn. I'm going to use yarn in a different color so that you can clearly see what I'm doing as I go. So the first thing we're going to do is pick up these stitches and trim off this cast on. So start by looking at how these stitches are constructed. You can see, if you tug these all a little bit, get them tugged out, see, you can see that there's clearly a stitch right above where my cast on is. So what I want to do is I want to put the right leg of each of those stitches on a needle. So I'm going to slide over here and try to find this one that's all the way at the end. There he is. So here's his little right leg. You're going to have a little half stitch on each side. I picked that up just to make sure that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. And I'll show you what to do with that when we get to the end. Okay, I'm going to pick him up. And now I'm going to go through here and pick up all of these stitches. Be very careful when you're picking these up that you pick up both of those strands. Remember, we were doubling our yarn, so you don't want to leave one strand just hanging out down there. Even when we're grafting, we're going to graft using two strands of your yarn because you don't want the graft to be visible. All right, when we get to this cast on edge, you're going to have this loose end. Pick it up because it will become a stitch. But when we take off this cast on, I'm sorry about that. When we take off this provisional cast on, this is just going to be a loose thread that's hanging out there. So just beware, we really do need him. So don't let him get away. All right, we're going to take our scissors. And this is the part where you want to be super careful. I would recommend doing this in very bright light. You're going to trim away this provisional cast on. So the way I do that, I just find that loop and I make sure that I don't have any of that yarn in there, and I just trim it away. The reason that I do it this way is it does two things. First, it does take off the cast on, but second, it ensures that I have every single stitch picked up and I'm not going to lose one as I go, because I can look at every single stitch and say, yes, I've got both strands of yarn on the right leg of that stitch taken care of on my needle. I can move to the next stitch. And you can trim it away. You can untwist it, whichever way is easiest for you. It kind of depends on the yarn that you use for your provisional cast on, what tends to work the best. With this yarn that I chose, I have to trim them away because it's a little bit fuzzier. So when I finish this, I'm going to end up with 53 stitches on my needle, plus this little tail is going to make 54. I will meet you there. Okay, so I have all my stitches now on the needle, and this new needle we're going to want in the back. So this way the right side of your fabric is on the outside. You don't want to put the wrong side of your fabric on the inside. I would recommend weaving in all of your tails before you do this, at least before you graft the second one into this, because it's hard to flip them around after that. So what we're going to do is we are going to alternate front needle to back needle, front needle to back needle. And if you've done the Kitchener stitch before, you'll see that this way is much, much simpler than doing the Kitchener stitch in stockinette. Because what we do on the front needle, we're going to do the exact same thing on the back needle. We don't have to do anything different. So remember I talked about having this little tail back here. Make sure that you don't lose this tail. That is your first stitch. We are not going to do any setup rows on this because what we will do is we'll actually make this first stitch. So we will take the yarn, if you have it coming, you should have it coming out of your front needle. And so we'll pretend like my pink yarn is this blue yarn coming out of my front needle. I just want to make sure that you can see exactly what I'm doing. So I'm going to go into this first stitch knitwise, and I'm going to slip it off, and then I'm going to go in the second stitch purlwise and leave it on, just like you would for a usual Kitchener, if you're used to a Kitchener stitch. So knitwise off, purlwise on. Okay. Now for the back needle, the first stitch is this rogue tail. So I wrap the rogue tail around my needle to make it look and feel like a stitch. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. Knit off, purl on. So I'm going to knit off, and I'm going to make sure that all of my stitches are all lined up here the way they're supposed to be. And then I'm going to purl on. Now, to make a garter stitch version of Kitchener, you repeat all the way down. Knit on, knit off, purl on. Knit off, purl on. And then back to the front. So we'll knit off, purl on. The biggest challenge you're going to have here is you are going to want to really pull this tight. Make sure you're trying to maintain this loose gauge because we want this to be invisible. Knit off, purl on. And you're going to work your way all the way down. The further you get, the easier it gets because you get these little tails out of your way. And you're going to knit off and purl on all the way to the end. Knit off, purl on. And you'll start seeing stockinette or garter stitch happening. And kind of keep an eye on it, especially if you're someone who has done a lot of stockinette version of this in the past, because it's really easy to go back into that old stockinette rhythm, and then you'll see that you've got 2 garter bumps missing whenever you take this whole thing off and you get to the end. So you want to just kind of keep an eye on that back needle, because that's the needle that's different in this version. And you'll just do that all the way down. And then when you get to the end, you'll knit off, purl on, and then you'll go ahead and knit through those 2 last stitches and just pull your yarn straight through to resolve those. So I will just continue going down my stitch row here, since I just have the world's smallest cowl that I'm working on. Knit off, purl on, knit off, purl on, knit off, purl on,